Hello everyone, welcome to this week's tutorial on ProRPA.com. So today we will be delving deeper into the work queues that we touched upon briefly in our last week's blog post. We're gonna go through each step by step, each of the step that is involved in actually getting to know about work queues, creating a work queue, adding data to it, traversing through it, blah blah blah, and so on, right? So let's get started. The first and foremost thing, right, is just get an action anywhere, just in your process studio, and in there you have to see if your internal business objects already has work queues in it or not, right? If it does and you have all the actions for it, all good, perfect. If not, if let's say you're not able to see any of those actions, then all you gotta do is you have to import the business object, the VBO, the business object specific to Blue Prism, so that you can get those functionalities in your RPA program, right? So for that, you go to File, and then you go to Import, and you choose Browse, and you have to go to the directory location where your Blue Prism application was installed. Usually, it's C drive, Program Files, then Blue Prism Limited, Blue Prism Automate, and then VBO. And you have all those VBOs like Excel VBO, Word VBO, some collection manipulation VBO, encryption, calendar related data, SQL Server, just to connect to the SQL Server and perform some queries and so on, right? And you have to import that. Once you do that, in case you still are not able to find the specific actions to whichever business object you just installed, or you imported rather, then just close the Blue Prism application and restart it, and that should do the job. That should do the trick. All right. Okay. So importing is done. Next, we got to create a queue first. Now, I have discussed this in the blog article as well, and I always say that the legible approach is to stop the video, first look into what the blog article is actually saying. Just go through it, just read it. And 90% of it should make sense, and the 10%, like the final validation, is something that that's the reason why I create the video for, so that you can also do the steps by yourself, right? It would corroborate to what you have studied, what you have tried to, or whether what you understood from the blog article is actually correct or not. It's sort of a validation. But to get to the raw part, the actual part, you have to develop that sort of a thing. So I cannot force, but I would highly recommend you go and read the article first. Okay, so back to the topic. As I was saying that what we got to do is we got to create the queue first. For that, we go to the system settings, like the system, and in here, if you look up, there is within the workflow, there is something called work queues. You go there. I already have a folder in here, so that's fine. If you want, you can create a new group altogether, just to group work queues in a single category, right? If you're trying to work with student data, then you may want to create a new group and just name it as student related work queues or something like that, and then you can create queues within it. But here it is. You hit the new button and you give a name to the queue. You get a key name as well, which is usually anything we give from the collections that we will be putting the data from, a header for the collection that we'll be assigning to my queue, right? I'm going to be using the student data as I showed last time. The student would have their name. If there is an enrollment number, sort of a column in that collection, that's even better. I would rather put the key name as enrollment number. Something that could uniquely identify is what we usually go with, but it's it's either way, it's fine. Then maximum number of attempts, you would want to put it as 1, 2, 3. If you want to retry in case there's some error, before marking it as an exception, it would rather give it another try, like for any of the items assigned to the work queue. And then status is running. That means currently I want it to be able to perform any operations, like whether it's assigning data to it, executing data from it, and so on. Right, that's the status. And that's it. Once you create it, you hit apply and stuff, and then you get the work queue. Now to check whether your work queue is actually available to the RPA program or not, you go to the control panel. Right? In control panel, you'll have queue management, and you can, like, following the hierarchy, you can select your specific queue, and you can see that its status is running. Right? That means it's fine. It's all ready. It's active. And all the other 2 queues that I have in here, they are also running, so I can assign anything to these as well, but I don't want to. This is some other program that I was working on. And currently there is no other item. All the items that have been assigned to this queue have been already processed, so there's no pending item. Everything is all like in a green perfect stage. Now what I'm gonna do is in my program, I'm gonna add like this action called adding students data to my queue. Now for that, I simply use an action. I think I'm not gonna go through how to use an action because we have gone through such stuff pretty nicely in previous blog posts. But in here, always when you're working with work queues, the business object is gonna be the work queues, because that's an internally maintained work queue, right? And that you should be able to see in your RPA program, since you imported the VBO for work queues. But technically it should be I would say like a pre-installed in your RPA program. Now the action is adding to queue, which means I want to add some data to the queue, and the queue name, the input, is gonna be my queue. That's the queue that I have given the name for, the queue name in here. And then in double quotes, because I'm using static text, or rather I could use a data item with initial value as my queue, and I can simply put that data item in here. And then data, what data do you want to assign to your queue? That's class X students. And in the class X students I showed you last time, here are the fields and here are the initial values. Okay, great. Now we have added some data to it, right? Let's go back a little bit. I don't want to set any priority, but we can defer until. That means like you want to wait for specific date and time, and only past that date and time is when you want to process your data items. Then if you want to assign some tags to it, if you want to have some status to it, those are the things, those input parameters that you can work with. And then for the outputs, you can get all the item IDs as a collection for all the items that are assigned to the work queue. That means from the collection, the number of rows is equal to the number of item IDs, or the number of rows in this collection as well, right? Pretty much the same thing. So item ID is something that uniquely identifies a data row from the work queue, right? It's got nothing to do with the collection. It's actually in the work queue. Once we have assigned all the data, right, all the collection data, then alongside those what do we call this, alongside that row data, you also have some item ID, which is like a primary key to uniquely identify that data row. That means that is assigned to it, and you don't want to store it, or if you want, you can. You'll get another collection like this with item IDs, and you can then traverse through it one by one. Or what I'm doing is I'm getting next item, right, and in here I'm simply putting the queue name as an input, which means this is the data, this is the queue from which I want to pull data from. And as you can see, for the outputs we have an item ID. That means whichever data row has been pulled, what's the item ID for that specific row is something which is pulled, which comes out as an output for this specific action, and also what's the data, right? The complete data row, and that's coming up as a collection because there can be several columns attached to just one row as well, and there will be most of the times, right? I'm getting the next item. I'm checking if the queue is null. That means if the item ID is equal to blank, then that means there is no item ID that was pulled as an output from the previous action, and that simply means that the queue doesn't have any data in it. The my queue, which we have used as of now, will not have any data in it, and we will simply end it. However, if this is not equal to null, you guessed it right. That means that there is some data that is already present in the work queue, and then I'm simply adding marks to another variable called sum. A sum is a data item that I have with an initial value of 0, and adding marks to sum means like sum is equal to sum plus data dot marks. If you remember, data was an output from the get next item, and I'm accessing its marks column, right? Because the column names is exactly the same in here as what we have in the collection. So data dot marks plus sum. So whatever the sum's initial value is before the iteration started, that will be added to the pulled rows sum value, right? And then it keeps on going through that same loop. Once all the data has been pulled from the queue, because it's also marking it as complete. I'm going to get into that in just a minute. And once everything is finished, then it simply ends the program. Now, marking item as complete. This is a bit tricky. What happens is when you have a work queue with some data assigned to it, then what we usually do is like it comes in a state which is like a pending state, right? By pending state, what I mean is that specific data item, that specific data row has not been processed yet. It's still in pending state. It has been assigned successfully. Everything is good, but it's now residing in there. Now, whenever this get next item happens, that means we have pulled that data out from that work queue, right? And once we have pulled something out, once we have pulled a data row or a data item out, then it simply comes into a locked state. And by locked state, what I mean is that it's in it cannot be accessed by anyone else because it's in process, right? Let's say if a computer is working on a software, and which is like a cloud software or something that is like centrally located, a lot of people can access it. However, if I have that open right now in my system, nobody else can access it, right? Let's say if that is like only one user can access it at one point of time, at one instant of time. So it's pretty much the same case that one data item can be processed only by one user, one system, one RPA application, right? So that's when it becomes in the locked state, and this is because if two resources are allocated to the same data item, it may come in a deadlock situation, which would be like, like a frozen situation. We won't be able to do, or both the systems won't be able to do anything, and they would be stuck like sort of forever. So just to keep that maintenance, to keep that transfer of work uniquely to each and every resource, we have this functionality, inbuilt functionality, where the data rows are in the locked state, right? Whenever it is being processed by any system. Okay, now once the processing has finished, you have to see whether, or you have to mark it as either complete or exception. Now complete means usually like the tick mark that I was showing you, the green tick initially, which you can also see in here. That means it has been processed okay, it's been processed fine. Now, however, if there is a course of action that you have for to mark something for later manual intervention, for manual work. Let's say, for an example's sake, right, I'm just making this up. Now I am trying to add 5 marks to every student's marks, every student's like score of numbers that he obtained in a recent test, he or she. Now what happens is that for one of the students, the system couldn't do the processing because there was something wrong. Like the mark cannot be more than 100 and somebody had 98 marks and I cannot add 5 to it. It wouldn't make any sense. So what I simply did was, I'm gonna mark those specific cases as an exception and continue with the rest of them. You don't want your program to stop anywhere it finds an error. You would rather want to continue like processing the other, I would say, the other items that are assigned to your work queue. You don't want to just stop and halt the whole program altogether, right? So for that cases, which you may want to look up later, you can mark those specific items or use cases within your work queue as an exception and continue with the rest of them. And whichever has been marked successfully, which has been marked as complete, are the ones that have been successfully executed by the bot. Right? So to mark item as complete, we go to the business object work queue. Oh, it actually opened up. I was going to ask the question. And the action is mark completed. You can also see below it is called mark exception, which, as you can guess, is something that you can do to mark an item as exception. Since this is all happening at the item level, that means at the data row level, and again, the data row is uniquely identified using the item ID. So item ID serves as the input, and there is no output in this case. Make sense? All right. Now, let's run this program again, and I want to show you mark exception as well. But right now, I don't have anything assigned to my queue, right? If I go here and there, you can see there are only 5 items. Let's run this. It's a little bit slow, so I can probably fasten it up a little bit. I don't want to do it like too fast, just so it would like pretty much, so you can see item ID and all that stuff as well. Empty, no, end. Now, if I go to the queue back, I just chose anything else and then went back to my queue, selected my queue again, and you can see now I have 10 different like items, because 5 were like executed on 20th, and on 28th I'm like executing other items right now. Okay, so that works fine. I'm doing everything at the work queue level. You can see I'm not traversing through a collection. I can do it in the collection if I had to do it only on one system. But if there would be several instances, several computers, several laptops, several RPA applications, several RPA bots involved in a process, then you would rather want to use work queues, right? And you can imagine the load balancing and all that stuff that we talked about last week. Now, to mark item as an exception, I'm going to simply make it as exception, mark exception, item ID I already have, I don't need anything else, and I don't need to store any new item ID as well. I just keep it as it is. Okay, and the new item ID would be used if you have like multiple attempts, as you can imagine, but let's go through this right now. Everything will be marked as an exception. Okay, so there's an exception reason that must be told, and for the exception reason, my own exception. Oops. My own exception. I'm just making this up, it's a text one. So this is just because I want to mark everything. So actually, which also brings me to a point. There was no exception that was exception name that was assigned to it. So that's why all the others are still in the pending stage, which is the 3 dots. The green ones are the completed one, the purple flag is the exception one, and the logged, as I told you, is like a padlock yellow color sign, right? If you want to free up the queue, what I usually end up doing is I simply mark them with an exception, because if you won't, then these would also be processed in your next step, right? And in case your program is not robust enough, you may end up doing, let's say for Roy or for Vicky or for Greg, you may end up doing the work again, or like twice. There might be duplication of processing, which you may not want. So either you have to fix it up manually, or like use different queues, or I mean either ways. Or if your program is fine, like running on it again and again, and you would want to process these items as well, and it won't make much of a difference to your overall output, then you should be fine as well. Like in here, if you remember all the sum that we have been getting, now the sum for Krish, Greg, Roy and Vicky would be added again, because these are like pending items. So whenever I'm getting new item in here in this action, these items will also get pulled along with the 5 items that I'm gonna be assigning if I run this program again now, which I'm gonna do. Make sense? I gave an exception reason as well. Everything, these 4 and alongside the 5 new cases that I'll be adding, all of those will be marked with an exception. Alright, so here I run it. I would rather make it faster. Finished. Alright, now if I go back, I see all of these people, and the sum is 735, because I told you those 4 people's marks also got added since they were in pending state in my work queue. And you can see 8 of these total, or sorry, 10 of these items have been marked with an exception, right? And usually what happens is people, let's say they schedule the bot to run at 3 in the morning, then at 9 a.m. whenever they will be coming to office to look into what exactly processed, and if there was any issue, they would just look at this report and they can see, okay, these are like the few people whose marks have not been updated. So I'm going to look into only these exception cases. I'm going to do that manually or rerun the bot. That's totally like depending on how many number of cases we have, what's, you know, like the quick time and benefit analysis sort of thing. If it is worth your time, if it's just 1 or 2 cases, you can just make the update and let it go. If you have like multiple exceptions, then you may want to run the bot again from the beginning, depending on how you would want to proceed. All right, so yeah, that is it for this week, guys. Thanks a lot. Please do let me know how you like the videos, and we'll keep on talking about RPA in general, and about programming, about the languages, about the technical tutorials on Pro RPA. Please do share, like, comment, subscribe to the YouTube channel, to the blog website, theprorpa.com/blog. Reach out to me if you have any questions at info@prorpa.com, and I'll be looking forward to hear from you guys. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Talk to you soon.